Kia ora and welcome to Fieldays TV. Today's session looks at how spatial information technology is helping to transform the rural sector. Put simply, the terms spatial, geospatial or GIS mean data and systems which are related to location and which can be used in digital mapping. Today I'm talking to three industry leaders who have specific experience in driving the adoption of spatial solutions within their own organisations. Terry Copeland, the Chief Executive of Federated Farmers, Grant Jackson, the General Manager of Milk Supply at Miraka, and Chris Claridge, the Chief Executive of Potatoes New Zealand. Great to have you with us today, chaps. As a bit of background for today's audience, we at Eagle have been working with New Zealand organisations like those of our guests to create spatial solutions for a number of years. Primarily, we do this with a technology called ArcGIS from the global leader in this field, Esri. In the rural sector, these solutions are in areas as diverse as biosecurity, health and safety, crop productivity and asset management. But while the maps themselves have a vital role in farming, these solutions are much more than just an updated or digital version of the trusty old farm map. When the data is brought together with powerful analysis, it can provide some great insight and allow all of us to make better decisions. So in this session, we want to speak to our guests about their own work in this space and their own insights. And so if I can turn to you first, Terry, perhaps you could share with us how Federated Farmers have been using spatial technology to better serve your own members.
We use it in two ways, actually. The most obvious one for us is how we put to life some of our policy positions when we're putting council submissions across or government policy that we're trying to react to give it some kind of real visual idea of how many landowners it affects or what the topography of the land looks like. If it's a fencing issue or a waterways issue, it all sort of comes to life and you suddenly realise the impact that some of these things have. The other area that's really important to us, we're very active in the adverse event space. And I'll give you one example where this live, being able to map farms and map land sort of on a continual basis is with the Nelson fires in 2019, where the fire front changed several times. We needed to know what properties were within the cordon and what were outside of the cordon and what we could do to help. And that dynamic of being able to map it accurately, quickly and knowing who's in and who's out was very important for us.
Thanks, Terry. If I can go to you now, Grant, I know that you've been very busy as well using spatial technology in Miraka. Maybe you could share a little bit of the work you've been doing around compliance and how spatial is helping you in that field.
Yeah, so we've had a really strong agenda to try and future-proof our milk assurance and making sure our farmers are ready for all the compliance that's coming down the pathway. So we invested a long time ago into a GIS platform for just monitoring what all the environmental risks are on each of our farms. And we found that Eagle technology really helped us integrate all the different data spaces and layers that we can bring into play. And with a farm environment planner, we've put together this template that we believe is pretty world leading. So the main thing is to make sure that our farmers, we needed a template where our farmers can understand what these risks are, because to most farmers, you know, it's really new. And we need something that's really intuitive so that farmers can look at straight away and they can relate to and understand, so they don't feel like, you know, they feel like they're working with business partners to find these solutions. Yeah. And we also need a platform that's also being incorporated by our regulators. So therefore, there's that transparency and that data flow so that, you know, we know that Waikato Regional Council, for example, is using the same platform. So for us, it's just all, you know, works together.
And that point on data sharing and transparency, that's an important point. I want to come back to that afterwards, actually, because speaking to you all before, that was something you all raised as an opportunity, but also a challenge. If I can turn to you, Chris, I know for you recently, geography's been somewhat of a battleground for you. I know you've been battling the dumping of cheap overseas chips into New Zealand, but I understand you also see geography and technology as an opportunity to battle unwanted imports of another kind.
Yes, Scott. So what we've seen is we had a biosecurity incursion towards the end of September 2018, where we had a soil-borne disease impacting on potato crops. In order to identify where the disease was and where there were suspected infected properties, we heavily relied on mapping technology in order to delimit the extent and to look to identify pest management strategies. So mapping from a biosecurity incursion management tool is very, very critical to our industry.
Yep. What were the data sets you were looking to incorporate in that scenario specifically?
So what we looked at in that situation is what crop was where and what type of cultivar was where, because what we'd identified is an incursion that was specific to a particular cultivar, and we wanted to see if that had had originated from the seed crops and how far back it had gone in terms of the seed multiplication, and as well we wanted to identify whether the disease had spread across into other seed lines. So from us it was protecting the overall industry. In order to do that, we've identified that we've got to develop better geospatial mapping tools for tracking and tracing crops over time, primarily because potatoes rotate, and they rotate across a wide area, because they effectively, in Canterbury, had to rotate for almost 5 to up to 10 years before they came back to the point of origin. So mapping for us is a very crucial tool to ensure that we've got secure seed lines for the industry.
I know we mentioned before about the sharing of information being a challenge and an opportunity. And when I spoke to all of you, one of the words you all used was trust. The fact that there has to be trust in the data and trust that the data is being shared appropriately in the right way with the right people. I know, Chris, you've been focused on this particularly recently. You and I filled several whiteboards on My Brain a few weeks ago. The whiteboards filled way after My Brain. I wonder if you could share some of your work in that space with folks.
So what we're concerned about is increasing compliance being placed on farmers and greater requirements for farmers to supply data, and there's almost an onslaught of forms and data gathering exercises. Now a lot of that data is being asked for repeatedly. Now a lot of that data is for farm mapping requirements, say for example for farm environment plans, but for a number of other uses. And what we're being told by farmers is that data should be collected once, and data should be shared where appropriate and protected where appropriate. Because one of the concerns that we have overall is that data may be misused and used not as a tool for good, but could be used to impose upon farmers rights and actions that aren't appropriate.
Yeah, and I've heard that myself in other fields. It seems particularly relevant in this field. Specifically, have you got approaches you're taking to facilitate that sharing of information with that trust?
So what we've done in the background is we've formed a group of companies that are looking at how we might share data and rules and permissions around that. So we've got a working group of companies in what's called the Trust Alliance, where we're looking to share data using blockchain technology. And we're also looking at how we might protect that data, because one of the key issues is data sovereignty of farmers. That data doesn't get given to a party and then misused or used later on to affect change of activity upon that farm. And that's particularly the case in regional plans, for example.
Yeah, cool, thanks Chris. Terry, coming back to you, I know that you mentioned that data sharing and the concerns around privacy and trust for your own members. What do you see Federated Farmers' role in helping facilitate some of those conversations and maybe some of that trust?
Yeah, so the value of something like Federated Farmers is that we've got that scale of reach, and so being able to capture what farmers are feeling and thinking about when it comes to things like data security, and there is a general mistrust of once the data leaves their house or their farm, where does it go? It seems a little bit nebulous at times if you're stuck out in the country, but also of concern for us is the availability of connectivity to a lot of farmers and growers around the country, which is very, very poor. Some information that we want to gather does need to be done live, some doesn't, but we're missing out on huge opportunities if we don't have good connectivity so that farmers can participate in some of this data sharing. But the more also farmers can collect data, the more they understand their property, the more that, not only from a productivity and an environmental point of view, but also from a community and social point of view, being able to collect things from a community at a community scale is going to be really, really vital to go forward.
Yeah. I know I've heard terms like the digital class divide used to describe those who do have good internet access from those who don't.
Absolutely.
You did a survey recently of your members, didn't you, to understand spatially where they were and what the coverage was?
We used two things. One, we looked at the opportunity around moving day or gypsy day in the dairy industry, and we know there's a whole lot of people that shift properties at the end of June. And one of the things we looked at was actually let's map the starting point and end point for those shifts and actually look at the scale. And we did that partly because the planning was done during, before COVID, but particularly during level 4 and level 3, our farmers are going to be able to shift. And if we are going to get dispensation for those farmers to shift, which is vital, what does it look like? And be able to give the government a one view of New Zealand and all of those movements. It was actually quite frightening to see the scale of it and then the impacts. And the result was that we got, even if we'd gone back into level 4, being able to show them digitally what that map looked like, there was confidence from the government side of things that we could manage that well.
Yeah, I think we may have a picture of that, of the end result of the map that was used to show back to government what the impact or what the extent of moving day was. And you had a simple survey form you sent out to your members where they put a dot on the map, said where they were going to, the kind of the quantitative aspects of it, how many people were moving, and that gave a single picture that could be used to show government you've done your homework, I guess. Yeah,
exactly right. And the other thing we do is an annual survey to understand how good or bad telecommunications are for particular parts of the country. And it's frightening how many black spots there are, even from a cell phone, let alone broadband internet. You know, we've got people around the country that can barely send an email. And if we want to start shifting data around the country and actually start understanding the footprint of New Zealand a lot better, that connectivity's got to be a lot better.
Yeah, connectivity is one of those things that kind of underpins all this technology. If you haven't got the connectivity, it removes a lot of the possibilities. I know we're seeing a kind of the use of satellite communications, but I guess that comes at a cost. And it's not practical for everyone right now in that point. Just going back to yourself, Grant, I know you spoke about the work you'd done around compliance. I wondered if you saw that as being a stepping stone to the future in terms of, you know, okay, it's compliance, but is there another side to the work you're putting in that technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, one part of it is risk mitigation. So we're looking at taking our farm environment plans and putting on layers, for example, for biodiversity, biosecurity, and health and safety, which helps actually maintain better HR relations, make sure our staff all feel safe. The other side of it is also around traceability through to our consumer value add products. So, you know, both our communities and our consumers, which can be quite different. You know, we've got our own domestic community, which effectively provides us with a social licence and wants to know what footprint that we're producing our food under. But also our consumers overseas, they want that transparency too. And, you know, a geospatial platform provides a strong integral data source that they can actually open the window from their home, wherever they are, and look straight down and see where the source of their foods come from.
Yep. And we're seeing that already in other sectors. I guess it's really exciting to see that happening in your own sectors and organisations. Just going back to yourself, Chris, did you want to comment on the specifics of where you saw that going? I guess the next extension beyond what Grant's talking about.
What I think Grant's just alluded to is that mapping underpins a lot of what goes on in the primary sector, because what comes on to the land and then what leaves the land and then its impact on the land, all of that's tied back to geospatial information. So having access to those tools and using the data that arises from that map is really important, because it's very powerful. You can look to maximise productivity, you can look to ensure that biosecurity is managed effectively, and also that you can prove, as Grant's alluded to, consumers worldwide that this is where the goods arrived from, this is where they've been in the chain, this is the provenance of the value chain. And I think for consumers, they want to have trust. They want to consume food products that they know how it was grown, where it was grown, and who had possession of it in terms of food safety. And for our customers in Asia, this is absolutely mission critical. And this is what I think is the key to New Zealand's economic success, is if we can prove without shadow of a doubt that our goods have been, and our primary sector goods have been produced ecologically in a sound way, and they've been treated and processed and packaged as safely as they possibly can, consumers will flock to them. I mean, it's just such a powerful story.
Do you see this happening anywhere else in the world? Are we followers or leaders in this area, do you think?
Well, we're constrained as as Terry's alluded to, by connectivity. I'd like the government to put as much effort into connectivity as they do into motorways. You know, let's not just build the physical motorways, let's build the digital motorways that we need to underpin the primary sector. You know, it's just ridiculous that you can't get cell phone coverage in Pukekohe. I mean, that's just nuts. It's all very well to have a motorway there, but you've got to have the digital motorway there, and as well bring people along with you so that farmers and the communities around them can engage and can use this particular tool. And as we've seen during lockdown, the digital space is really critical to have. You've got to have it to operate as an economy. Without it, we're slightly lost. So I see the government making good moves in that regard in terms of ag tech, so embracing ag tech going forward. So there are real opportunities for New Zealand to leverage off our own domestic situation, cherry-picking what's good internationally, grabbing those international things, bringing them back and building something that's fit for purpose and fit for New Zealand.
Cool. I think we can actually now go to the map that we spoke about, which was Terry's map that he used to crowdsource the information of the moving days. The whole point of it was a powerful image to put in front of someone, whether you're trying to convince them of the provenance of your product overseas or trying to convince them of the extent of what might be seen as a very risky operation such as moving day. A map, something everyone relates to, and they can trust the data within it. I wondered, Terry, from your own point of view, beyond the connectivity, if you saw any other challenges to this technology, really having that transformational effect on the sector. Are there any barriers that you see?
I think there needs to be a bit more of an education focus too, so how to use this technology, that it's not scary for the average farmer to use. Most farmers get into farming because they want to work the land, not because they want to sit in front of a screen. But we are seeing a lot more technological savvy happening at farm level, and the more we can encourage that, the better. We know that the use of smart technology on farm has never been higher than it is today, and even just using devices or applications that you can use from your phone that affect technology on farm, the uptake is quite phenomenal. I think going back to some of the more consumer side of the conversation too, we've got this real opportunity post-COVID that people trust New Zealand have done the right thing during COVID. Yep, there's been a lot of pain for a lot of people, but it's been worth it if we can get to the other end and start to show you can trust New Zealand's food. We can only bank on that for a wee while. So I think what Chris was saying is that if we can demonstrate the science behind it, we can prove that our food is safe, then it doesn't matter what any other country is doing, what technologies they're using. If we can demonstrate it, we're going to steal a march.
Yeah, yep. From your own point of view, Grant, in the dairy sector, is that something which you would see as an opportunity to jump on and go with that provenance aspect, proving not just the technology and systems behind the scenes, but using that to prove the quality of the product that you're taking internationally?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Having consumers have trust in the information they're reading is really, really important, and to see that those credence attributes that sort of define and help build credibility behind the story that when the brand that we're trying to sell overseas is really important. I think consumers are reasonably savvy, and they can tell when they're being fed something that's pretty shallow, and that's where we're looking to forge a new space where they can actually, something like what Merino New Zealand have done, where they can actually see on farm, this is the family that owns this land that I got this bit of wool from. It's a little bit more challenging in the dairy industry, given that milk is collected in bulk, but it's a challenge for us, and yeah.
Yeah, and just picking up on that human touch, bringing that human touch to the digital touch is really important. It's all very well having all this technology, but you've got to put it in a context that people understand. So giving people access to the farm story, showing them the people that produce the food is really powerful worldwide, because consumers want to connect. They want to know who grew my produce, who looked after the animals that I'm consuming. They want to know that. They don't necessarily want to tick on the side of a package. They want to look into and see the whole provenance, the whole story behind it. Now that's really powerful. If we can unleash that, that gives people confidence, and that makes them feel connected to, and brings them on the emotional experience of consuming food. Because food isn't necessarily just a nutritional exercise. It's about connecting emotionally.
Yeah, and I think that connection word, that's the key one. We see that with with maps, and I'm a map geek, so I'm kind of biased, but we see that with maps a lot, and using that to bring information together and having someone have that connection to the underlying data sets. I wonder if I can just change tacks before we close to another use of geospatial, which is using it for health and safety. I think we've mentioned it before, and we saw spatial being used during lockdown to help with health and safety in two ways. I guess one is just worker safety, making people aware of risks and having maps up front. But the other one was around the tracing of individuals, so we could do that kind of bubble protection work. I wondered if you had any thoughts on the potential for using geospatial for health and safety. I know that we're now recommending best practices for any operational map, digital map, that you have hazards in there as just a layer. So people see that and they can turn it off, but front and centre, if you're going into a station or into a farm that you're not familiar with, you're seeing that very visually. And it's a really strong visual cue to the sorts of risk which you might be undertaking by going into that farm, and also for reporting things. I mean, I wonder if that's something you've seen within your own membership, or?
Yeah, we're seeing, well, obviously when you, for example, when you hold an event on a property and we bring people onto a farm, one of the key things is mapping out where the risks are.
Yeah.
What would be enormously useful is to get those risks before you come, and so to be forewarned beforehand. But that's a sort of a classic example of how mapping can be used as a communication tool beyond just merely here's the activities that are being carried out in that location. So that's something from a dairy perspective that I know that's being done throughout the industry, that sort of mapping of health and safety, isn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly emerging. And the other thing is that, health and safety is dynamic too, so it changes. So, the bulls, for example, are in one paddock the next day and there might be another paddock the next day, and if you've got a contractor coming on farm, for example, to soil test, they need to know which paddock they're in. And it's actually quite cumbersome, the traditional way, which has been to induct someone through having a sign-in board. Then they've got to go to the shed and look at the whiteboard to find out, which paddocks they can or cannot go into. Whereas, like you say, if they, I think where we're looking now is a contractor can drive in the entrance, they can scan a QR code, immediately they've got a GIS location of all the risks, and they can sign off and take responsibility that they've been advised straight away. It's a far more streamlined process. Exactly.
We've been doing exactly that, as you say. Scan a QR code, go in, you see a map, you can relate to it, and it's before you enter the field. I love the example of the soil samples in the bull. It's something I can definitely relate to. There's a long story, I'll tell you later on about it.
Yep. So this maps are not just a history. Maps are can be used as a future tool. So that's getting maps into day-to-day operations and getting them embedded in the activities of enterprises, so that they're not just seen as a historical record, but as a management tool and something you can use to predict and something you can use to actively manage your farming operation.
And that's what we see as a differentiator between paper map, which is still great, paper is still fantastic, but in many scenarios you want to have that dynamic data set which has just been captured from a drone or from a sensor or from a weather forecast, and bring that to the end user to make decisions at the sharp end.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right, because you've got farms across the road from each other. One could be flat and one could have quite a bit of undulating hillside, and you're going to treat those quite differently, whatever vehicle you decide to traverse the farm on, and also deciding what vehicle you're going to use might be predicated on the slope of the land. So you can't really get that from a flat two-dimensional map, so it's really invaluable for the health and safety of particularly people that aren't used to your farm coming on and staying safe.
Yeah. So that third dimension, that terrain aspect, you maybe see on the screen there some examples of some of the maps we're talking about. And sure, they're maps, they're dynamic maps, but they're also in 2 and 3D. And we see the third dimension being really important to understand the lay of the land, literally, and to make better decisions. I know we've got some examples where these tools are now being used out in the field. If you've got connectivity, we can work offline, but it's a bit more challenging to allow folks to understand things like the impact of slope on fencing regulations, and to have that information at your fingertips before you go out and before you go and carry out your activities. I wondered if we could go back to the topic of data. I know you mentioned that there's data sets which need to be controlled, and there's a sharing aspect to it. But one thing I would like to say is that in New Zealand we're very lucky with data being made available by a whole range of sources. I know that if you start looking around, and we've done this, and we've been curating a whole bunch of data sets that are publicly available that you can use. There's a lot of money being spent on capturing terrain information, soil information, rivers, and actually the beauty of that information is that under the licensing, that can be used by anyone. That can be brought into their own map. And so maybe something to bear in mind when you're creating these systems, you don't have to go and capture the data all yourself. You can take advantage of some of these data sets. And we're seeing that from regional councils, sharing soil and water and slope information. There's a lot of money going into capturing that. And we see that as an opportunity to take advantage of it and use it in individuals' own systems. I wondered, Chris, if you had some data sets that were on your wish list, if anyone's listening for a new data set, what are the gaps that you see?
Yes, so one of the issues is we've got lots of data sets that's sitting around, and it's trying to bring those data sets together and use them to manage A, at an industry level that can inform policy, B, at a regional level that can inform plans and compliance with plans, and then down to a level of a farm level. So those data sets operate at different levels. So, and we can see that both central and local government have massive piles of data which are not really easily shared. So there's data sets sitting inside central government. And I think the apocryphal story about MPIs, they have some 600 data sets which don't necessarily talk to each other as efficiently as they should. So one of the things is having open data source, as you've just said, and then data source that exists inside government departments. Somehow we've got to manage that a lot more efficiently, and also farmers underneath can tap into those data sets and use them, and yet still retain ownership and sovereignty of their own data. So this is an interesting conversation to have as to how we do that.
Yeah, and I'd say we're better placed than many countries in terms of where we are with open data, but it's definitely an ongoing conversation, an ongoing journey. The examples which we've seen around even just imagery, bringing together, we've got some great imagery that's been flown of the whole country. In fact, there's a few gaps in the Alps, but for most of New Zealand now you'll have some really good aerial photography, which if you're trying to plan anything, an operation, or understand the land, that's a great asset to have as a backdrop to your data. So I know that people make great use of that. I know the work that's going on next is to capture elevation, to catch a 3D model of all of New Zealand, and we know there's a whole bunch of end uses for that. I think we're coming towards the end now, and so I just want to say finally thank you all very much for joining us today, to Chris, to Grant, and to Terry. I want to finish by saying if you want to learn more about any of these topics, then please do check out the awesome Fieldays TV, the awesome Fieldays website. It's been great having this conversation on Fieldays TV. For those of you who do want to check out the website on Fieldays Online, you can see some videos about the demonstrations we've seen here, but also you have the chance to win a competition, which is a fishing charter for you and 5 of your mates on the Eagle Magic boat. Best of luck, and thank you very much.